What's up, everybody? This is John with John Fair Innovations, bringing you more League of Legends Worlds 2021 content. So we had the final day of an amazing play-ins. Certainly one of my favorites. I really loved last year's play-ins, and this year's play-ins was also equally as amazing. Now today, last night I should say, we had our final best of fives to see the final two teams making it through to the group stage. Obviously, Detonation Focus Me and LNG topped their groups, so they had already qualified. And now we had Harmer Life versus Beyond Gaming, as well as C9 versus my boys from Oceania Peace. So I'm going to be breaking down the first best of five, which is, of course, Harmer Life versus Beyond Gaming, which was the first one of the night. Now, obviously, because of the Maoin suspension, PK had to substitute in, and they sort of flexed between Liang and PK being mid. I think Liang was mid for two of the games, and then PK was for the rest of the best of five. Very clean, stompy win for Harmer Life this series. It was very much in their favor. Very easy 3-0 for them. I felt they weren't really pushed at any stage. Beyond Gaming, they still have this same problem where it's Doggo versus the world. And I've said in multiple videos, I always think that's a recipe for disaster when you are relying on simply one person to carry your team in this meta in a professional setting, because it's just so hard, because once you've taken out that one source of carry, you then lose the team fight, which we saw happen quite a lot for Beyond Gaming this play-ins. Now, in the first game, we saw something really good from Harmer Life. We saw Morgan stepping up. Again, I think Morgan's a little bit underrated. He's a little bit memed because, as I said, I think he gets considered bad because he gets compared to LPL and LCK top laners. But you think of the quality of LPL and LCK top laners, and of course, Morgan's going to seem like he's not as good. But if you put him in a different region, I'm sure he would do perfectly fine. And there's a reason why he keeps on getting signed by LPL and LCK teams. He's clearly got some talent. Something that Harmer Life, I think, did really well this play-ins was Flex Aurelia. If you don't know, if you aren't really familiar, Chovy's Aurelia is absolutely disgusting. His first Worlds game against G2 in 2019, when G2 were at the peak of their powers, when the meta was perfectly suited for them to do really well. Chovy, in the one game that Griffin lost to G2, he picked Aurelia, and he still was able to pop off. He still had that 1v2 outplay on Caps. So his Aurelia is really feared in the in high elo and the professional scene. So that's why Harmer Life were able to pick Aurelia straight away and were able to really dictate drafts by this Aurelia priority. Morgan has also shown now that he is very, very capable and quite a very good Aurelia. I don't know how deep his champion pool will go. So maybe teams will start banning the Aurelia against him to see what else he's got. But he's shown that his Aurelia is actually something to be feared. It's actually a really, really good pick for him. Beyond Gaming, they tried to take away Chovy's Tryndamere mid by selecting it for themselves. However, Chovy, he came up with the counter of the Fiora. The Fiora run and go, so we saw his Fiora mid. And this game basically was summed up as Harmer Life's solo laners being too strong for Beyond Gaming. Harmer Life, their bot lane, they were able to get the counter pick. Actually, Beyond Gaming counter picked themselves. They basically had no choice but to put Doggo on the Aphelios. They really needed him to be on a champion that could 1v9, and Harmer Life kind of forced their hand a little bit. They took the MF away. They left the Aphelios open, knowing full well that Beyond Gaming is going to have to take it and try and hope that Doggo will be able to pop off despite that counter pick. I just felt that Harmonlife's draft was really, really strong in all facets of the game. The biggest takeaway was we had another game where it was Doggo versus the world. Beyond Gaming tried to sort of cheat their way a little bit out of laning, but yeah, the leads that both Morgan and Chovy got, we saw a lot of Church of Chovy today. So if you're a Chovy fan, you got to see some classic Chovy. Still, I don't think he's still hit his peak form, which is something to be scary to think about moving towards the group stage. But yeah, we definitely saw some Church of Chovy. Really, really tough situation for Liang and PK. They're both top laners, and you have the task of going against the best laning player in the world. And yeah, full credit to them. They tried really hard, and you can't. I'm not going to knock them. I'm not going to say they played poorly or that Chovy really gapped them per se, because honestly, I think even if Malwin was in there, he still would have got gapped just as hard. So I don't think you could really say, well, they lost because, PK was in mid or because Liang had to be sub-mid. I don't think there was, it would have been that much different. I actually felt that they played quite admirably given the situation that they were put in. Really strong win though. It was a 29-minute win. It was the slowest win for Harmonlife, so that speaks to volumes of how stompy this series was, is that the 29-minute game was the one that dragged out the longest, and also a little bit to do with the fact that how Harmonlife drafted. They drafted with the Fiora, for example, that needs a little bit time to scale. Overall, Harmonlife's objective control and their team fighting were just way too strong for Beyond Gaming, and Doggo giveth and Doggo taketh. I don't really want to harp too much on the him getting caught out, but it's the nature of being the one carry for your team, is that you have to play immaculately, you have to play perfectly, and unfortunately he did get caught out, and Harmonlife were in cruise control for most of this game anyway. Game 2, we saw Beyond Gaming try to really throw some spanners in the works. They picked Viego jungle. They had Liang on a Kled mid. I actually really liked that Beyond Gaming tried this. I'm not saying that the draft itself was that great, but I did like the fact that they identified that they're not going to beat Chovy and Morgan in solo lanes, so let's just try and pick champions that don't require too much resources, that don't require too much presence from your jungler to be able to be relevant later on in the game. So I did really like that with Beyond Gaming. It's something that I had a lot of problem with Unicorns of Love. I felt Unicorns of Love tried to play too conventionally, and that was not their strength. And so I really like the fact that Beyond Gaming actually tried, because, you're going against Chovy, you're going against, Deft. You can't just simply outplay them with individual skill. You don't have the players to do that. We saw Morgan pull out the Jarvan counter into Kennen. We actually saw this time how the Jarvan Kennen matchup is meant to work, how Jarvan counters the Kennen. I still am not the biggest fan of it. I don't think it's the hard counter that people are making it out to be. I do think there is a world where if the Kennen gets ahead, the Jarvan just doesn't get to play the game. So I do think it is very much dependent on how that early game gets played and how the junglers impact that lane. I don't necessarily think it's just a straight counter, the same way you would say Wukong absolutely completely counters Jace. No matter how far Jace gets ahead, the Wukong always just gets to a point where it'll be able to counter the Jace. I don't see that same matchup there. I could be wrong, but that's just my personal opinion on that one. But of course, talking about jungle presence, Willa had an absolutely amazing game on the Lee Sin. He looks like a completely different player when he's on the Lee Sin. He seemed to have agency. He seemed to be impacting all the lanes. He seemed to just be really proactive on the map. It was really great to see. He had some excellent pathing, and he didn't let Doggo play the game, which really was Harmer Life's game plan, was that, shut down Doggo and make someone else be able to beat them. And of course, no one could. No one is probably on BK that is probably at the same level as these players on Harmer Life. So with the exception of Doggo, of course. So, really great game plan and really great pathing by Willa to be able to facilitate that. I heard on the broadcast an absolutely insane stat. It came from Atlas, and they repeated it on the broadcast, that Deft's career win rate on Miss Fortune is like 85%. It's probably slightly higher now, given that he got 2 more wins today on it. But that is insane. That is like Deft. Sometimes people forget about Deft because you think about like Uzi as the great ADC of all time. You think of Bang with all the championships, but Deft is absolutely one of the greatest ADCs to ever grace this great game. So, every time you hear stats like that, you hear stats about his Jinx as well, for example. Absolutely insane. And of course, again, he had a really great performance on Miss Fortune. Miss Fortune seems to be the strongest ADC in the meta right now. Next up, of course, we have to talk about Chovy. Yes, we got the Church of Chovy today. We got to see the lane dominant clinic. He just, as I said, very, very hard. I don't really want to talk about, Church of Chovy too much because I feel like it's really unfair on Liang and PK because they were put in a very, very difficult situation. But Chovy can only obviously play against what's in front of him, and he did what we all expected him to do against pretty much any competition. We do expect him to have that sort of dominance against, laners that we expect could possibly win Worlds this year. So, not surprising that he was able to have a really strong game. He had a strong game here on the Azir. He did get outplayed, though, by Liang with the Blast Cone. Liang made a really good play on the Blast Cone. But outside of that, Chovy he got super fed, super strong. Absolutely was a monster late game. And yeah, it just felt like that Harmer Life, again, in every facet of the game, had a better draft and were able to really dominate through their lanes. And this time around, Doggo wasn't even able to get the big damage and the resources that he had got in the previous game. So that's why it felt like it was even more stompy than the previous one. I will say though, Beyond Gaming, they fought really hard. You have to give them credit. Obviously, very difficult situation that the rest of these players are in. So they really, really fought hard, and that's all you can ask of them. Especially, you got to give props to PK for having to step in like this. So nothing but respect for him and Liang, certainly. Is Vista the only support to win on Amumu? I'm just trying to think. I know he's won 2 games now on the Amumu. I swear he's the only support that's won on Amumu. I think every other player loses on it. The champion, I think, is actually really strong in the support. I think people just underestimate how tanky the champion actually is, or rather the lack of tankiness the champion has. So, you obviously got to keep that for grain of salt. It's something I saw a lot of problem with a lot of Nautilus players as well. They overestimate how tanky the champion is. Certainly thinking of Beryl, for example, would just engage like he was engaging as a Leona and would get popped. So, still expect to see a lot of Amumu moving forward. Now, I've been praising Morgan today. Have to give him some flame. Definitely ×9 report in the chat. Make sure for Morgan for stealing Willa's Penta. Oh my god, like when he did that, I was like, Morgan, come on, I've been defending you all tournament. I've been talking about how great of a top laner you were. Typical top lane mentality though. If you can't get the penta, you got to steal it to make sure that no one else in your team gets it. But Willa got that quadra. Pretty much sums up the dominance that Willa had in the jungle. Certainly a really huge jungle gap this series, I felt. And this was the quickest game of the series. It was a 23-minute victory for Harmer Life. As I said, Beyond Gaming, they really did try to avoid laning, and by cheating in a lot of these drafts, we saw a lot of Kled, we saw Gwen, Trin, champs, as I said, don't really need much resources. But the gold that Morgan and Chovy were getting in lane was just way too huge that the deficits became too much of a problem. So you could understand what Beyond Game were trying to do, but Harmer Life still way too strong in those solo lanes. Lastly, we saw game 3. Doggo finally got his hands on the Misfortune, the strongest ADC in the meta right now. Outside of course, permabanned Lucian. We saw Husha mix it up a little bit. He picked the Talon jungle. PK swapped to mid this time. He picked Ornn mid, and we of course got Liang on the Fiora. So they did try to match a little bit more, especially with the Fiora. They tried to match a little bit more the lane dominance. Ornn, obviously, again, another champion that doesn't require much resources. So, hopefully to be able to cheat that lane against Chovy. We saw the second game of Aurelia. Again, Harmer Life first picked it. You got to understand how strong this champion is for Harmer Life. And Harmer Life actually showed a message to the rest of the teams remaining that they're willing to put Morgan on Aurelia, which means that if they first pick it, you can't necessarily just counterpick it, because it can easily be flexed into the mid lane, because Chovy, as I said, may be the best Aurelia mid that we have on the professional scene. Deft and Vista mixed it up this time. We saw Kai'Sa Gragas. Gragas really is a very underrated support. I still think he is a super strong support. He has a lot of self-healing, and he has a lot of engage and peel. So really good support and something that a lot of teams I think have been overlooking. I expect it to be seen a lot more as we get to the group stage. Again, Beyond Gaming really prioritized getting Doggo ahead, but the huge CS leads were a problem again in the solo lanes, and it just seemed like Willa was again pathing really strongly on the Lee Sin. He seems to, as I said, to be a very different champion when he's on that Lee Sin. He gets a lot more agency. He gets a lot more priority. He has really great mechanics on the champion. Perhaps maybe it's the nature of Lee Sin that always looks a little bit flashy. But yeah, he looked really good on it. And yeah, I think the biggest thing that Harmer Life got, because obviously they put Chovy on Orianna, so again, focusing on late game scaling and team fighting. Willow was able to get the Rift Herald down and take down the mid lane at 11 minutes. And that essentially made it so that, Husha could not play the game. You're an assassin Talon jungle with the mid lane turret, with the first tier mid lane turret gone. It allowed Harmer Life to really aggressively push their vision lanes, and then they were able to easily track Talon, and obviously then Talon can't gank and do all those crazy assassin Talon things that we all hate in solo queue. What more to say? It felt like very much a repeat of the first game as well. We saw Chovy, Church of Chovy, some more Church of Chovy facts. We had 231 CS at 20 minutes, which equates to 11.55 CS per minute. So, again, the benchmark of excellent professional league is considered to be 10 CS per minute, so well above that. And of course, at that same moment, at 20 minutes, Morgan was up 50 CS on Liang. So Again, highlighting the strength that we saw from Chovy and Morgan in their solo laners. And this game was a 25-minute victory. All these games were very easy, quick wins for Harmer Life, and they showed a really clean 3-0 today. They showed a really strong performance. Yes, you could argue that maybe perhaps Beyond Gaming weren't as strong as they might have been, but that's not Harmer Life's problem, and that's not Harmer Life's fault. They can only play what's in front of them, and they did what they needed to do. They really put on strong performance as they move toward the group stage and now look to potentially trying to get out of groups. They showed clearly that they were the second best team in play-ins, and yeah, Harmer Life starting to ramp up a little bit is something that if you're a Harmer Life fan or an LCK fan, you are happy to see that they are. Not only are they playing quite well, they're playing quite well beyond simply, Chovy versus the world. We're seeing Willa play really well. We're seeing Morgan playing really well. We're seeing Deft have a really strong play-ins. We're seeing Vista have some strong games as well. So it's not just Chovy versus the world, because that to me is not sustainable, especially when you get to the group stage. So they of course move to Group C, given that they are the final LCK team and have to go to that group. So they go of course to group with PSG, Fnatic and RNG. Harmer Life will really see themselves as they'll fancy themselves to be able to get out of that group. You could talk about perhaps thinking RNG is stronger, but certainly the top two teams get out. So while you might clearly think Harmer Life is less than RNG, Harmer Life will definitely look at Fnatic and PSG as games that they definitely can win. And you never know with Harmer Life, they could take a game off RNG. You could, Chovy is, we talk about Chovy a lot, but there is a reason why we talk about him a lot. So Harmer Life, while they would probably be favored to come last in this group, will fancy themselves to be able to potentially get second in this group. Now, final point of the review is, of course, player of the game, player of the series, which I'm going to give to Willa. I think Willa had a really great performance. He was able to really shut down Doggo while at the same time getting his lanes ahead, having perfect objective control. He seemed to really, really outshine Husha, especially on the Lee Sin. He seemed to just be everywhere on the map, making plays. Really great performance from him, and something really great to see if you're a Harmer Life fan. He ended the day with, a CS average of 156 per game, which might not sound like a lot, but you compare that to Husha, who had 133 CS average. So he was averaging 23 CS more than Husha, while at the same time I think impacting the lanes a lot more than Husha was. So he seemed like he was a lot more proactive while still getting these CS leads. And also you look at his KDA on the day. He had 22 kills, 4 deaths, and 24 assists, compared to Husha, who had a 4-12-8 day. KDA for Willa ended up 11.5 compared to Husha of a KDA of 1. So you can clearly see how Willa was really impacting the rest of the map, while Husha, 4-12-8, in games that there were a significant amount of deaths and fighting, showed that he wasn't really impacting the game half as much as Willa was. So there you have it. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Let me know what your thoughts on this series. Do you agree with me giving Willa player of the series? I'm sure there are people out there saying Chovy was robbed, but I can't give it to Chovy given that the situation that Beyond Gaming were in, and I felt actually overall Willa did have a better day. But always stay safe, be kind to one another, and I'll see you next time.